And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another YouTube reading guide series. Today is the fifth video in a series of 10 videos that are walking through the often overlooked and neglected DC annual events, which are specific annual events published by DC Comics throughout the 90s. In creating this guide, I've read the 198 comic issues that comprise all the different DC annual events, and I've used that knowledge to build up this video series. And I'll just jump straight into video 5, which is the year 1995. Now, just to quickly preface here, today's video is exactly the same as video 4 from my DC Year 1 guide series, which is also on my channel. So if you've seen that playlist about DC Year 1 and the entire DC Year 1 universe, of which there are something like 24 different series, then the fourth video in that was dedicated purely to these annuals, which a lot of people don't realize are part of the Year 1 branding. If you've seen that, please feel free to skip this video. There's nothing new here, but I did want to record it again to make this playlist for this reading order feel complete. Okay, so what is the DC Year 1 annual event? Well, we have to think about what a Year 1 is. A Year 1 story usually details the first year or a character's active continuity, hence the title Year 1. Keep in mind that's distinct to being an origin story. Not every origin story is a Year 1 story, but every Year 1 story is an origin story. Basically, Year 1 stories are united in name and content only. So an origin story for Superman might be he flies in a rocket ship and crashes on Earth, and the Kents discover him as a baby. That's his origin story. But his Year 1 story is his first year acting as Superman. Now, the very first Year 1 story was in 1986. It was Batman Year 1, written by Frank Miller. And there were subsequent sequels, so Batman Year 2, Batman Year 3, and then you had stuff like Nightwing Year 1 and stuff like that. Um, and they kind of built up until about the mid 90s. Then we had the event Zero Hour, and after that, DC had a bit of a continuity reboot. Don't worry, I will cover Zero Hour relatively soon when I launch my DC event series. But after the event of Zero Hour, in the summer of 1995, they decided to produce a Year 1 themed DC annual event. In other words, it was a Year 1 one-shot story in all of that year's annuals that covered it. Now, currently, Year 1 stories are usually produced in the form of a limited series, not tied to any of the publication. So, what we have here for these Year 1 DC annual events are things that are not linked to the continuity of the series in which they're in. So, the Batman Year 1 issue, for example, is nothing to do with the ongoing story. These are standalone, discrete things. Okay, with that little preamble out of the way, what are the particular issues? We'll start off with the Superman family of comics here. So I'm going to do them in roughly what I think is the chronological order within the Superman issues. So to start off with, we are going to have Adventures of Superman Annual 7. This introduces the character of Kalibak and ends with Clark Kent getting a job at the Daily Planet. Action Comics Annual 7 is written by David Michelini and is a pretty weird story, to be honest. It's about Superman's first travels into space and outer space, and I put it here because at this point he already has a job at the Daily Planet. Then we have Superman Annual 7. This was written by Roger Stern, and in this, Clark already has his job, but recently debuted as Superman. To be honest, this is more of a Year 1 story for Dr. Occult than it is for Superman, and it's placed here simply because at this point Superman still has no idea of his true origin. Next up, I would put The Ray Annual 1. I know that seems a bit weird, and it's sort of a Year 1 story for The Ray because he's clearly a fledgling superhero in his first year, but it has really quite a sizable Superman appearance. Otherwise, I know nothing about The Ray, so I thought I might as well stick him here amongst this group. Next up, we have Superman, the Man of Steel Annual 4, written by Louise Simonson. This actually shows Superman meeting the various Justice League members for the first time ever. This includes Batman, Flash, Martian Manhunter, and even Aquaman. Interestingly, this meeting with Aquaman is exactly the same as the events that we're going to see in his Year 1 annual as well, which we'll discuss in a few seconds. And keep in mind that at the end of this issue is when Superman sort of discovers his true origins as a Kryptonian. Next up, I'd say we have Steel, Annual 2, also written by Louise Simonson. This is a slightly clunky narrative around kind of inner city African American experiences, but I guess that's a hallmark of the era. It has a weird time travel bit in it, so during the main story, John Henry Irons, the character of Steel, is briefly transported forward in time to the events of Steel issue 8, the ongoing series. Otherwise, a pretty decent origin story, and it kind of ends by overlapping with the events of the death of Superman, which of course is an important part for the origin of Steel. Next up, we have Doomsday Annual 1, the issue I've put in the thumbnail. So, this is set within the framing context of Superman relating a story just after his return from being dead. Overall, this is set after Doomsday's origins were explained within the series Superman Doomsday, so it's more of a recounting of early battles he was in. It consists of three separate stories. The first one written by Dan Jurgens and is Doomsday meeting Darkseid for the first time. Pretty interesting. The second one is written by Louise Simonson, that's all right. And the third one is written by Roger Stern and is basically Doomsday versus the entire Green Lantern Corps. Keep in mind, this single issue is reprinted in the Superman Doomsday Omnibus and in the trade paperback. The final year one issue for the Superboy family is Superboy Annual number 2. Now, this isn't an origin story of any kind. Instead, this is a story just set exactly 1 year after Superboy debuted upon the death of Superman, which, when you think about it, is actually quite clever and kind of makes sense. Okay, well, with those out of the way, let's jump into the JLA thread of year one issues. Now, these basically go in any order, so I'm doing them sort of alphabetically here. To start off with, we have Aquaman Annual number 1. This has both Wonder Woman in it, as Diana before leaving Themyscira, and Superman in it. And in fact, it has the first meetings with each of them, so it's set before the Justice League issue. It's a Poseidon-focused story, and it's by Peter David. It's told as part of a journal reading retrospective, and the only really good bit in this is the final page, where it kind of has a one-page splash of Arthur. Worth noting, like I mentioned a few moments ago, the Superman meeting here is the exact same one, beat by beat, scene by scene, dialogue by dialogue, as the one in the Man of Steel annual that I just mentioned. Next up, we have the Flash Annual 8. This is written by Mark Waid. This is a year one story following on from the previous Waid miniseries. Interestingly, this is the year one. Sorry, by that I mean the previous year one miniseries. Interestingly, this is the year one origin story of Wally West taking on the role of the Flash from being Kid Flash, in other words, assuming the mantle after Barry Allen's death. It also features Hal Jordan's Green Lantern and Jay Garrick's JSA Flash. It has a second story in it, which is labeled Flash Day 2, which is a bit weird, and that functions as a sequel to the earlier Flash miniseries I just said, the one written by Waid, where Wally becomes Kid Flash. And the reason it works like that is because it's set in those very early days. Other than Mark Waid, the notable thing here, I think, is this has some very early Humberto Ramos artwork. Big fan of his artwork. Next up, we have Justice League of America Annual 9. This isn't a year one story as much as far as I can tell. It's just a random New Gods story, and I'm not a New Gods fan, but there we are. Next up, we have Green Lantern Annual 4. Now, this is a fascinatingly unique take in a year one story, as it really isn't one, but it sort of is. This features both the current Green Lantern in 1995, who's Kyle Rayner, and the former Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, in his role as Parallax. Keep in mind that in 1995, when this was published, he hadn't yet been redeemed. So it's kind of like a weird Freaky Friday story where both characters switch lives for the course of the issue. But whilst Kyle ends up living in Hal's life, it's living in Hal's life when he's already Green Lantern, yet not Parallax. Meanwhile, Hal becomes Kyle when he was also Green Lantern, but before his girlfriend Alex gets killed by Major Force, a really famous event that led to the kind of the birth of the woman in refrigerators trope. Next up, we have the issue of Green Arrow Annual number 7, written by Chuck Dixon. Now, this is set as a reminiscence within the frame of one of Ollie's first battles as Green Arrow, flashing back to the time on the island that made him Green Arrow. So, it's a decent issue, but this completely contradicts the later Diggle miniseries, which is a very good miniseries I would recommend. Next up, there's Hawkman. Annual 2. This issue is terrible. It's not really a year one, it's just a weird story that's an integral part of an ongoing Hawkman series. It does have three different time periods, one after another: ancient Egypt, 1940s, and now. I'm not a Hawkman fan. I essentially find the character incomprehensible and unappealing. So if you're into him, here you are, year one issue. That doesn't really talk about year one at all. The final JLA-based issue, I would say, is Wonder Woman Annual 4. This was a self-contained one-shot that, again, didn't seem to be a year one issue at all, so don't get your hopes up. Next up, let's look at some random DC annuals. And these, again, go in kind of any order, so I've shoved them in for want of a better methodology. I've put them in alphabetical order. We have Deathstroke the Terminator Annual 4. So this is set in the midst of the ongoing Deathstroke series and will generally be pretty hard to follow outside the context of that series, which I haven't read, and so I found this hard to follow. However, this annual has got a couple of flashbacks, just sort of reminiscences by main characters about Slade Wilson's background before he became Deathstroke. It also has a lengthy backup story with some origin retelling around Slade's daughter, Rose, who I've always been a bit of a fan of. Next up, we have Guy Gardner, Warrior, Annual Number 1. This issue is terrible, in my opinion. It's not really a year one for a start. It's just a weird story as an integral part of the ongoing Warrior series, which I haven't read and I don't really plan to because it seems terrible. It ends by saying, to be continued in Justice League of America, issue 101. Yeah, just so you know. Next up, we have Legionnaires Annual 2. This isn't a year one story either. It's just some random self-contained story called The Four Horsemen. I mean, maybe this was set in the early days of the Legionnaires, but if so, it's definitely not an origin story or, in fact, a year one tale. Please shout in the comments below if I got that wrong. I've read very little Legionnaires because I basically don't understand any of the Legion of Superheroes sorts of stuff. Speaking of which, the next annual is Legion of Superheroes Annual 6. This is another weird story with several one-shot pages that were just like posters for Legion members and indices of their vital stats. It's framed as a story where someone called Liaison Lass, and yes, that's the name Liaison Lass, reviews the origin, or I guess year one stories, for 3 Legion members. So it has 3 smaller stories. The first one is about a character called XS, and it's written by Tom McCraw. The second one is about a character called Kinetics, written by Tom Payer. And the third one is about a character called Leviathan, written by Mark Wade. I didn't get on with this at all, but of course, keep in mind I am biased against Legion of Superhero stuff. Speaking of things I'm biased against, Lobo, Annual 3. Didn't enjoy this at all. It's sort of a year one story. It's a weird narrative flashback of Lobo reflecting on becoming a bounty hunter, but then getting involved in all this weird time travel stuff. It's just very odd. Moving on, we have New Titans Annual 11, written by Marv Wolfman with art by Greg Land in an early Greg Land appearance. Not really a year one at all, again. More an in-continuity filler issue, much like those kind of... do you remember those issues by Claremont where the X-Men played baseball? That sort of stuff. That's kind of what this felt like. It has several characters reflecting on their origins, though. So in terms of continuity, I would set this after Titans issue 122. Keep in mind it includes Bart Allen as Impulse, it includes Kyle Rayner as Green Lantern, and it ends on an in-series cliffhanger that continues on in the New Titans ongoing series. It also refers to the recent events of Monarch and Extant, who are the antagonists of the DC annual event Armageddon 2001, which is actually the very first video in this video series. And Extant is the antagonist of the DC event Zero Hour, which I've mentioned, but I will be covering in more detail in a few weeks' time when I start launching that series. Next up, another annual here, we have Shadow Dragon, Annual 1. I know very little about this character, so this issue was written by David Michelini and is framed as a reminiscence. Like I say, I have no idea who the character was. Essentially, sort of like an East Asian version of Iron Man, I think. It has a single panel cameo from Superman at the end that doesn't really help place it at all chronologically. So just read it whenever you want. Sovereign 7, Annual Number 1, written by Chris Claremont. Again, not a year one origin retelling at all. It's confusing, messy, incoherent, and of course it features Lobo, who I can't stand. So if you're a fan of the series, that's what this annual is. And finally, in terms of random annuals, we have Spectre, Annual Number 1, written by John Ostrander. I know that this series of Spectre, written by Ostrander, is very, very highly regarded by some people. I haven't read it, so I don't know yet. This story is framed as a reminiscence and is kind of an origin and kind of a year one at the same time. So take that as you will. Okay, that's pretty much it. Oh no, wait, I forgot. Sorry. There's one character that people tend to be quite interested in, but don't really know much about him. Someone called Batman. So in terms of Batman issues that are year one branded, here's a rough chronology. So these are all the Batman themed issues, and I think I've roughly got them in order. To start off with, we have Catwoman, Annual Number 2. This is a scene-by-scene paraquel, and by that I mean it happens alongside and at the same time as the original Frank Miller Year One Batman Year One story. Note that it leads into the later Catwoman Year 2 arc, which is in the same Catwoman series. And a little Easter egg for those 90s fans amongst you. If you remember the bit in Night's End, I think it was issue Batman 509, which features the armless master who gets killed by Shiva, and at least kind of Batman is actually getting his groove back, essentially. He features in this annual, and in fact, the only other appearance of him in DC Comics ever. So if you fancy your Easter eggs, there you go. Next issue, Detective Comics Annual number 8. This is a Riddler origin story. It's not a Batman origin story. So, again, this is told as a retrospective. It's written by Chuck Dixon, and it's set at a time in which Batman and Jim Gordon have developed kind of a working relationship. Um, Worth noting that this is reprinted in the Batman 4 of a Kind trade paperback. All right, we also have then Batman Annual 19. This is the first appearance of Scarecrow and is written by Doug Mensch. Now, this contradicts the later 2005 Year 1 Scarecrow mini, which, if you want to know about, you should check out my Year 1 guide, because that story features Robin, whereas this issue, Robin's not around. Anyway, at this point, we know that Batman's met the Joker, Catwoman, Two-Face, and Hugo Strange, and there is a bat signal. Again, this is an issue which is reprinted in the 4 of a Kind trade paperback. Next up, we have Batman Shadow of the Bat Annual 3. This is Poison Ivy's first appearance and more of a thing to do with her, really. It's got quite a stripped down Batman. He's got a motorbike, still hasn't got a Batmobile, and the Batcave exists, but is basically like an IKEA desk and a punch bag. Anyway, it is described as being 1 year into his career, and again is reprinted in the Batman 4 of a Kind trade paperback. Cool. Next up, we have Batman Legends of the Dark Knight Annual 5. This is all about the creation of Man-Bat, so a Year 1 for the Man-Bat character, and is written by Chuck Dixon. The Batcave now has the Penny, it has the Joker, and it has the Batmobile, but no T-Rex. And this story is reprinted in the Batman 4 of a Kind trade paperback. Speaking of the 4 of the Kind trade paperback, if you want to have an idea what that looks like, here's a picture of it. It's really hard to track down. It's out of print, so I don't know what would be easier for you to track down the trade paperback or the annuals. I just picked up the annuals as single issues because easier for me to get hold of. Right, next up, almost at the end now, Robin Annual number 4, also written by Chuck Dixon. Now, this is often told origin story of Dick Grayson's parents dying, his adoption by Bruce, and then his first forays as Robin, up to the point he catches his parents' killers. So it's it's by the numbers, isn't it? It's Robin Year 1 by the numbers. What I will say is at this stage we know that Bruce has the cave, the car, the penny, the T-Rex, and the Joker card. He also has a working relationship with Jim Gordon, and Robin is fighting Two-Face, Joker, Ivy, and Riddler. It feels like the last few pages of this issue is kind of a montage that overlaps with the series Robin Year 1 from 2001. Again, if you want to know about that series, check out my Year 1 guide. And last but by no means least, this is Azrael Annual number 1. This is entirely not about Azrael. This is entirely about his dad, Ludovic. So Azrael is Jean-Paul Valley, Ludovic is Ludovic Valley, and it's all about him. Although it's told kind of from Jean-Paul's perspective as a retrospective kind of reminiscence. Right, well, there you have it, all the annuals comprising the DC Year 1 annual event from 1995. You can see that DC Fandom lists them here as follows. So feel free to take a screen capture of that to check out that website. And I hope that was helpful. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. As always, please follow me on Twitter at I am Thomas Judge, where I will post a daily review of whatever comics I've been reading. You can get an idea of what I'm up to on the channel. And as always, please support the channel by heading over to Amazon.com and checking out my prose novel about superheroes. It's a completely original piece of work. The first episode in it is called Arrivals, and the series as a whole is called No Gods or Kings. You can find an excerpt of that on my website, nogodsorkings.com. Until next time, everybody, stay classy.